Something I've been talking a lot about here is the phenomenon of barstool conservatism. And I know it can sound a little cringe, but the basic idea behind it is that there are a lot of people who voted for Donald Trump who don't care about traditional socially conservative values. So abortion and guns, they're probably more likely to be secular. They're mostly men. They're people who are anti-political correctness and specifically anti-woke. Dave Portnoy and Barstool kind of typifies that exact type, both a voter and the brand itself is very aligned. So anyway, a lot of this has come up in the context of Roe versus Wade and how exactly that contingent of pro-choice Republicans are really just anti-woke Republicans, previously non-political, and now people who are really, really animated in the new culture war. How are they going to respond to that? Dave himself actually spoke on his podcast. Let's take a listen to what he said.
If that is an issue, I'd vote Democrat. So it's a great fucking ploy. I don't understand, and I thought this in my head too. It's like theoretically Republicans are like less government, small government. So like shouldn't Republicans be pro-choice because let the person, now I know the argument, yeah, you don't want the federal government making the laws, you want the state, but overall, the less government is just let a fucking woman do what she wants with her body. Keep the government out of it. That's to me what that is. It's like, yeah, you can't ban it. If a woman wants it, great. She doesn't want it, great. Her choice. No government. Less government. Less government. That, whatever. Mm-hmm. It's a crazy thing. It has to be said. People, I'm sure some people are like, that's not your thing. They're going to be mad. It's a super sensitive issue. I don't care. Certain issues, you have to be like, what the fuck are you talking about? This is one of them.
All right. How was that Mac Jones interaction?
Great. He's my new best friend.
Okay. We had to keep the last part. So funny. By the way, shout out to Eddie. Eddie listens to the show. He's a cool dude. I like Eddie's his co-host. Big fan of Eddie.
Nothing to say about that. Let's talk about something I'm comfortable with.
It's a hilarious. Also, and so I wanted to check. Rogan is another big leader in the Barstool con type thing. Somebody who's been trashing Democrats for like 2 years, politically correct, all of that. Opened up his latest show with Doug Stanhope. The very first thing that they talk about, he blasts Roe versus Wade. I think these are important.
So the ending
of Roe versus Wade. He's like, this is crazy, terrible law, Texas.
Old right-wing Rogan once again.
But this is my point, which is that these two newly culture, again, he would dispute that he's conservative. I don't think he is, but I do think there's a difference between being culturally right-wing today and culturally conservative. And I would put Portnoy and Rogan kind of into that category.
Yeah.
Whereas being culturally conservative is a whole other, more of like a 1990s disposition. And so previously, Republicans were set to win an R+7 type victory. And my friend Ruben Rodriguez on Twitter, great follow, by the way, highly encourage you guys to go check him out. He said something which I thought was important. He said this election was setting up to be a referendum on the economy, on COVID, and on political correctness and gender ideology. And those three things were going to lead to possibly the biggest Republican victory of an entire generation. Now, it's not going to be that. Now, look, that could change how exactly things vote. They probably still win. And look, you don't necessarily need Barstool cons in order to win the election, but a huge portion, nearly 1/3 of the people who voted for Donald Trump in 2016 and 2020 were themselves pro-choice, Krystal.
Well, and
those are not traditional Republicans.
I think, and this is why, honestly, in terms of their national commentary, you have heard Republican political figures leaning less into the abortion debate until, I mean, obviously now their hand is forced. Right. But you've heard them leaning more into, you know, the Don't Say Gay bill down in Florida, more into CRT. Like,
yes, for a reason.
This is the growth industry within the Republican Party.
It's true.
And so the problem with this decision and why they're like, let's not talk about that. Let's talk about the leak. The leak was terrible, right, guys? We hate the leak. It was an insurrection. It was literal terrorism, whatever. Is because, there's a segment of their new followers and supporters who are not cool with this
media,
direction. Who may even not be like fully pro-choice. But again, the overturning of Roe versus Wade is, by the numbers, a fairly extreme position and one that puts you on a step, even with a portion of your own base. I mean, the part that, the reason why I definitely don't identify with this movement is because, economics is core to what I care about. And so even though, in certain areas I'm like anti-woke, although it very much depends on exactly how you define that, because I'm not with some of the insanity around like, oh my God, gay people are grooming people, or even some of the freak out around CRT. But that's just like, to me, it's a side issue, and the core issue is economics. And I don't know I think Portnoy is like a union buster and like kind of economically conservative. So
he's very libertarian.
The part I don't understand is really putting wokeness as like your key, like central issue to your politics. That's the part that I don't understand. The one thing I will say is I think that because that language has been adopted so much by the right, and the sort of like anti-censorship language also adopted by the right, even though, of course, we've demonstrated on the show a million ways that there's a lot of inconsistencies and hypocrisies happening there, it can be very hard for traditional political pundits to put people in the right ideological categories. Like, it scrambles their brains.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
Rogan scrambles their brains. You and I scramble their brains in certain ways. I get accused of being like a right-winger because, oftentimes, even though like literally issue by issue, I am very left on almost everything, because they just can't kind of understand the dynamics of what this means and where it places you politically, ideologically. So it is an interesting dynamic, I guess that's what I'll say.
No, definitely. And the reason why I think this stuff is important is that, and also another ground on which the left can now abandon is there's all this birthing people language which is out there. And I noticed with Roe, it disappeared like the drop of a hat. And what really showed me this was Gavin Newsom put out a tweet yesterday saying if men could get pregnant, this wouldn't even be a conversation. And that, was it was amazing to me because it just showed me that they could drop their unpopular and idiotic woke language in a second and pivot to the actually popular position of protecting what they, women's rights, or like how they say it. And I was like, wow, because the reason that the right was winning the new culture war is because they were like, we need to protect women's sports. They're like, we need to protect like actual gender, like traditional gender roles and not let people brainwash our kids. That is a very popular position. And it was amazing to me that the left could immediately drop a lot of that, pivot to the extremely popular position of like, hey, like women are under attack, and they can just pivot to this new ground, which again just scrambles the entire new way that this conversation was trending.
And so
I think it's important.
Look, I'm obviously a supporter of trans rights and trans equality, and I have issues with what's going on in Florida. Where I have problems is because there is an instinct on the left to obsess over this language and like condemn you as like a hateful bigot if you don't use the like birthing people language, which the whole goal should be like broadening the coalition, helping bring along people who may not be exactly where you are to start with. And when you use language that's very like niche, academic, and off-putting from the start, like Latinx is the perfect example of this. You aren't doing the work of broadening the coalition, and in fact, you're just sort of trying to virtue signal and put yourself in your own little niche club that's always going to be politically irrelevant. So that's my issue with like the woke language, and it also oftentimes gets weaponized to cover by corporate forces, to cover like Disney, to cover for their actual like economic abuses. So that's my issue, which is a little bit different from what your issue ultimately is. But I did note that same thing as you, because, when I started tweeting about Roe being overturned, I was already, because I just said women, I didn't say birthing people or whatever, and didn't have like caveats in there or whatever. I was actually ready to see in my comments like a backlash about my being insensitive or whatever, because we had seen Bernie Sanders tweeted something along these lines a while back and got all this backlash about like, he said something about women and women's rights and got, backlash in the comments about not using the right language. So I was kind of ready for that, and I didn't see it at all.
Yeah, I'm not done surprised.
Yeah, so
because when it really comes down to it, everybody knows this is bullshit,
Well, I think it's interesting. I think it's just like you said, there was a recognition that like, oh, let's not mess this one up by using language that puts us out of step with, just a sort of majoritarian language and sentiment. So interesting.
I think it's an interesting phenomenon. Not good for the right, in my opinion, electorally, but we'll see how it plays out.
See how it shakes out.
It's interesting also to see the way that Dave's talking. So there we go. We'll see you guys later.
All right, more for y'all later. Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.